Boom, according to that, I'm live. The streams, it says, are in excellent condition. It's good to see you all. Thank you all for joining me just now. Yeah, last couple of weeks, people have said, when are we going to get a jam again? So I just went and did a bit of an impromptu Korg. I haven't played with Korg in ages, actually, so it's kind of fun to make some loops there. Thank you for those of you who join me. People probably still rolling in now. As you roll in, as always, say hello. It's nice to see people who say hello and to say hello back. Great to see people do what Odie Jr. does. Love the boom emoji there. Good to see you. Guys English World, Dan H., fellow music lovers indeed. Mr. Cordy Chep, no technical issues. There was a slight kind of one. Well, I couldn't set up the screen capture on the Korg thing, and I had to change the streaming key twice because I was setting up different streams, but yeah, all good. AV84K, hello, good to see you. Yeah, check out, I mean, I don't know if we'll even leave it up, honestly. It was just kind of messing around, but yeah, I'll leave it up if people are interested. I haven't done, like I say, music in a while, so nice to do that. Yeah, 15 viewers. So again, if you're in there, Carlos Diamante, good to have you in here. Good morning, good afternoon. I think it's good morning where you are. Good morning, Senor, good to have you here, and everybody else. To be like Carlos. Dean Bennett, long time no see. Good to see you, man. Excellent to have you in here. Listeo, good to have you in here. Say hello, be friendly. It's just nice to see who's in there. Makes me not feel like I'm talking to myself. As always, remember, you can just say my name, Hiko Simon. It will flash orange there in the comments, and that will indicate that that'll grab my attention anyway. If you want to ask me for a topic, if you want to just ask me for a topic or say something to me that you want me to notice or react to, that's the best way to do it. 270 AJ, good to have you, 270 AJ. Mr. Cordy Chap, you think your headphones are in trouble? Oh yeah, you said the bass was all distorted before. I definitely do not have a radio voice, so I shouldn't be upsetting your bass now, certainly, but yeah. Yeah, that would explain it. Sorry to hear that, Mr. Cordy Chap. Yeah. Andrea from Melbourne, lockdown 4.0. Yeah, as an interesting one. It does sound like it sucks, but there again, in between the lockdowns, you've got pretty much full sort of freedom. You know, we're in state of emergency 3.0, and we've never really had a lockdown here in Japan. And, you know, given that, you know, in New Zealand and Australia, cities just fly into a complete panic and go into pretty harsh lockdowns immediately after a few cases. You know, we're kind of cruising along at, you know, today 480 cases. It's going down roughly 50 cases per day, so it's going downward, which is a good trend. But we're dealing still with, you know, dozens of deaths every day, hundreds of cases, or actually nationwide I think it always adds up to about 1600 cases a day. Again, it's coming down in Osaka and Tokyo, which is good news, but it's going like crazy in Hokkaido and Okinawa in particular, mainly because people went there for Golden Week. So, you know, it's kind of like, it feels a lot more relaxed up here, but of course that's not a good thing if people are dying, and that is, you know, so I think the Australian approach is pretty good, even though it indeed, I know it sucks that you have to go through those sort of brief, really tough lockdowns there. So yeah, hope you're doing okay with that. Tokyo 503, thunderstorm, Sedan, Tokyo. Yeah, I was going to go for a run, and it was raining really hard at one point. It was a bit of a squall. So yeah, I kind of did something else and looked out the window, and it was sunny, so I went for a run today. But yeah, not rainy yet. Rainy season's just like constant rain. But yeah, we're sort of, it's not quite hitting Tokyo yet. We're still getting sun. It's supposed to be sunny again tomorrow, but with storms late in the day. So, you know, not quite fully into it. But indeed, Tokyo 503, we were seeing the same weather. Another lockdown. Shubas, you made it on time. Yes, Shubas, you made it with us. Good to see you. Our man from Panama. I think you're a man. I think, in any case, our person from Panama. It's one thing I hate about English, that we have to, that grammatically they force us to throw gender into words all the time. But yes, Brian Candela, name I don't recognize. So excellent. Very happy that you said hello, and hello right back at you, Brian. Good to have you with us. Love it when people say where they're chatting in from as well. I just get kind of excited knowing that I'm talking with people in different parts of the world. But yeah, Tudom, howdy. Good to see you, Tudom. Who else we got in here? Welcome to the world, guys. Indeed, this is what I love about this. This is indeed a world chat. Shubas, need butter for your popcorn. Go get the butter. Seriously. I see what you did. Yes. Well, you're very lucky to live in a country without, you know, Ministry of Agriculture managed butter production, and I would say get all the butter that you can possibly get and drown that popcorn in it. Erin, the moderator and the editor, she has done a bunch of videos this week. Some of them done really well, actually. Got a bunch of views and comments. Really appreciate that. I also appreciate the moderator skills, so thank you always, Erin, doing a great job. Andrea Mulboy comment to me, only 5 cases locally, but a mystery case in aged care again. I mean, yeah, it's funny. Once you get to like 500 cases, no one really cares anymore, unless it's like an entire school, which happens now and again. I mean, yeah, we had the Australian, it's not on my topics tonight, but the Australian softball team actually arrived, the first team to do a pre-Olympics camp in Japan. A lot of these camps have been cancelled, but the Australian softball team is doing one in Saitama. And it's going to be interesting because, not a lot of cases up there, but they have cases. I mean, they would have, by Australian standards, completely freaking out levels of cases and no real lockdown, just a lot of guidelines to try not to go near people. So it'll be interesting if, anyone from any of these Olympic teams, but particularly Australia, gets it. But we'll see how that goes. AV84K says, you just received the Johnson vaccination today. Awesome. Feeling a bit feverish the day after, but all okay now. That's awesome. I mean, it is in the topics. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is coming up. The government has actually purchased a bunch of it, but they have submitted for approvals, I believe, in the next couple of weeks here in Japan. And yeah, hopefully it'll be available. Maybe it'll be one of the choices when I can get the shot. The idea of just getting it once. Yeah, the thing with vaccinations, I mean, I get the flu shot every year, and I know it's not exactly the same, but yeah, that thing, you always feel a bit crappy for about a day after that shot. I've heard that, yeah, you can actually feel, particularly after the second shot, if you're taking 2 shots, I hear that you can feel pretty crap. But yeah, I mean, get it all over with in one shot. Why wouldn't you, right? No, awesome. I must admit, I mean, the Pfizer Moderna ones both seem pretty good, but the Johnson & Johnson one has that appeal, doesn't it? So good on you, AV84K, and yeah, I hope you feel better tomorrow, and sounds like you're feeling better now, and awesome, you got vaccinated. One Johnson, good evening, good to have you in the chat indeed. Yeah, thunderstorms and squalls all over the place in Tokyo today. Whoops. Sometimes I just roll the mouse a little bit and it decides to jump all the way to the end. Yeah, I heard that Melbourne man. I would have thought you would have figured out that you don't need all the toilet paper anymore. Like, why are people still rushing the toilet paper? I guess it is the lockdown thing. It really does trigger a panic. It doesn't make sense to me, but yes, I'm sorry to see that. But yeah, Brianna W, I am good, and I'm glad that you're here. I'm better now that you're here, so excellent to have you here in the chat. As always, good to see you there. In Spanish, you have to attach gender to every noun. Yes, I've heard about this, and other European languages do it as well. I think German and French, but some countries it's like a table is male, or a bridge is male, and in some countries and female and others, and it changes the psychology about the objects. We don't have that in English, but yeah. No, I remember learning Spanish. And it's kind of like, is the table male or female? And it's like when you're a New Zealander and you get it wrong, and the teacher's looking at you like, well, how could you possibly think that that a table is female? Of course it's or male. Of course it's female. And yeah, that makes about as much sense as needing to understand how people self-identify gender that you don't even know. I want to pay respect to people, but at the same time, it's a grammatic flaw in European languages, I think, that we give so much of a crap about it. But yes, that is what that is. Yes, look at that. The butter and corn emojis both working for Andrea Mobile. It looks like Google's discovering that I'm actually psychologically safe around butter emojis. That's nice to see. All the butter, indeed, yes, put all the butter on it. Shubhas. Who else we got? Sadiq in here, message retracted. Well, live long and prosper. Again, good to have you back in the chat, Sadiq. Who else is in here? Skipping down, Johnson & Johnson baby powder. Yeah, I love that stuff too. I've got some over there somewhere, I think. I probably need it now. It's getting summery, sweaty, all that sort of stuff. Quint, I miss Quint Rankid. Good to see you, Quint Rankid. As always, welcome back to the chat. Dan H, you're surprised Naruhito hasn't had many stories since he's become emperor. There was a story on him today, but yeah. Well, first of all, in terms of like actual stories, like British royal family stories, I don't want to get decapitated. And no, their job is to be boring. It's like you saw The Crown, right? The job is to be as boring as possible. There was a story today that there was like the national. What was it? It was the Shokubutsu, so it's the national flora, exhibition in Shimane Prefecture, which every year since the war, the emperor has attended every year, and he attended by remote conference this year for coronavirus safety, and they made a big deal about that, where he gave some big speech about plants. I still think this is honestly a little bit hilarious. This is all basically the cover story that General Douglas MacArthur created for the Showa Emperor Hirohito, that he was just gardening through all of World War II, which, pretty much everyone knows, just like they know that the Constitution wasn't written by the Parliament. Everyone kind of knows that this was all imposed at this point. I find it kind of charming that the royal family still keeps up the farce that the emperor was just gardening the whole time and attends this event, this gardening event every year. But that was news today. So that was the thing, but that's right. I really have nothing to say. Sadiq from Miami. Yes, Pfizer is the best. There will be a third shot. Yeah, it sounds like, good money for Pfizer as well, I suppose, if they can make it regular. But if it's like the flu shot and you get a booster every year, again, what I love about the shot, apart from the fact that it seems to work exceptionally well and on the variants and whatever, and sign me up, I can't wait to get it. It's more, I'm excited about the technology behind it. The story behind the person who did it, the Hungarian, scientist who couldn't get funding in Hungary, went to America, actually got it working back in the 80s, and no one was interested. No pharmaceutical companies were interested in it. It's taken like 30 years, 40 years for her to be vindicated. She was just basically ignored because no one knew who she was. When she discovered how, mRNA vaccines, she open sourced it, she published, she made it available for free for anyone to use. She could be rich off this. But these companies that have commercialized it have done very well. But it was kind of for BioNTech and so on, it was a shot in the dark. It's a great story, the story about how they got developed and their potential, not only for coronavirus, but for things like cancer and things which have been untreatable for now. I just love the technology and the story behind the mRNA viruses, including Pfizer, also Moderna. But yeah, that's the business. You're getting that in Miami. So yeah, that's the main one that we're getting here in Japan too, and I cannot wait to get that. Aaron's been thinking of digging back into past shows to find the origin of the butter joke. You know what? It's in there somewhere. I think I just lost my shit one day, like at length for about 30 minutes, just ranting about butter shortages. If you look through my titles, it may even be in butter. I remember it was only meant to be like a 30-second news update, and it turned into like a 30-minute rant against communism and collectivized agriculture. Wasn't really where I was intending to go with the show, but it did appear to leave an impression. I'm sure you can find it. Good challenge, treasure hunt. Kerberos Tenshi, good to see you there indeed. While having breakfast. So you're in Europe? Are you in Europe? Breakfast in Europe is kind of afternoony, unless you're waking up late. But I recall that you're from Eastern Germany, correct? So I guess you must be. Maybe you're in America. Well, anyway, welcome to the show, Kerberos Tenshi. Good to have you. Travis Moore, good to see you. Italian is gendered as well. 6 or 7 years of content to watch through. I think that's about right, Mr. Cordy Chip. Am I caught up? Sergeant Bilko, yeah, carrots seem to work fine. Andrea, behave, Andrea. Yeah, Bassett. It was a pretty big rant. It was memorable. I tell you what, you want to make a short? Find the original butter rant. I tell you what, that would make a great short video, Aaron, if you can find it. I might help you find it. Honestly, I want to watch it myself. It did leave an impression. Barry Convex, good to have you here in the chat. It's 10:45. I've got to get into the topics, or else I'll be at 11 o'clock at night, and I'll still have only gotten through 2 topics, as always seems to happen. Sergeant Bilko Sleepy 314. Summer fog in Santa Cruz, California. Love to hear the surf report from Santa Cruz, and yeah, summer fog. It's kind of nice. I can visualize that. That seems very, very cool. So nice to have you in the chat as always. Everyone waking up. It goes rambling again. That's what I do. I'm a rambling man. That's a Waylon Jennings song. My dad used to listen to country music. I am rambling indeed. I don't care. Start my butter factory. No. Have Marmite shortage. You have a Marmite shortage? I kind of stopped eating Marmite and Vegemite, apart from that, because I bounced between Australia and New Zealand. I was like Vegemite half the time and Marmite half the time. I used to have it like on Weet-Bix with bananas and all that sort of stuff until I was like about 7 or 8, and then I don't know, I just never ate it again. I can't get back into it. It is the natto of New Zealand and Australia, but it's good stuff. It's good for you, but I can't do it. But sorry to hear about your Marmite shortage. 3:30 in Germany, but it's your first meal. So there you go. You are in Germany, but it is late in your day. So that was my first guess. I do look a little bit unkempt. Yeah, I didn't shave today. what can I say? I'm letting myself go. I have lost a lot of weight. I've been running, but unkempt. It's probably the video showing proper focus. You can see the shadow. I'll shave tomorrow morning. I probably should have shaved today, but yes, I'm doing the Don Johnson look. Sadiq will know what that is. So yes, Tai Nakamura, good to see you. 6 years back at least. Tai Nakamura, ohayo gozaimasu, good to have you, man. Especially appreciate all the people joining like Tai is early in the morning. Let's get into the topics, or else it's just like never going to happen. So as always, I'm going to go in and read the topic, focus, and then I will come back to the topics. And if you have something that you want me to come back and catch and respond to, do what Guys English World did, right? Hiko-Simon, it will flash orange and I will come back and address it. But let's jump in. The first couple of topics tonight are all a lot of gender-related stories this week. Some interesting ones. First one really surprised me actually. 7&I, the parent company of 7-Eleven, has announced that they are going to triple female executives to 30% by 2025. In Japan, that's a remarkable number. I mean, the number, I think that the overall percentage of executives, do they have it here? It's something like less than 10%. In fact, I have to put in my password to show the whole thing. Another interesting thing that people, I remember my sister mocking me for saying that 7-Eleven is a Japanese company. It actually is. I know that, yes, 7-Eleven was started up in America, and it's exactly what's happened with Yahoo, for example. American company that started up, included a few branches in Japan that were wildly successful, while the brand in America kind of died out, and in the end, facing eradication and bankruptcy and shutdown and whatever in America, the Japanese, the very successful Japanese franchisee, rocked back over to America and said, hey, sell it to us. We'll take you over. So both in the case of Yahoo and in the case of 7-Eleven, the Japanese sort of offshore affiliate, the sort of Starbucks, the Japan branch of Starbucks came back and bought the mothership. That's what happened with 7&I like 20 years ago now. 7-Eleven wasn't doing so well, and so 7&I Holdings, Ito Yokoro, a big department store chain, went and bought out 7-Eleven, and they are basically, so it still exists in America. They're being propped up by the Japanese company, but basically if you go to 7-Eleven like anywhere in Asia now, whatever, they use all the American branding and everything, but everything in the convenience stores, they've actually got like the sandwiches and the bentos and everything. It's all because it's run by the Japanese company. 7-Eleven is now a Japanese company, even though it started out originally as an American brand. So I always find that kind of really cool. The fact that I find it fascinating that they are confident setting that target, and it's not, as I've talked about on the show before, it's not easy to just suddenly pick 30%, pick however number of women at random, or to hire people from outside who don't know anything about the company. And that's usually not the Japanese way. There aren't executives like in America. There are professional executives who just seem to be like rock stars, going from company to company, some often not doing very well company to company either, but that doesn't really happen a lot. You do get outside directors and stuff like that, but generally they're selected from within the company, which means that when you want to improve the underrepresentation of women within executives and companies from like 10% to 50% or whatever, you can't just choose them. You got to actually have, it takes like 20, 30 years to do that. And a lot of companies, certainly from my time in Japan, are hiring more women. But I remember my first job in Japan at Deloitte, consulting at the time, Deloitte Tomatsu Consulting. It doesn't exist anymore in Japan, actually. But when I joined it, there were like 100 hires and like 5 women. I think the numbers have improved a lot since then, but obviously it's not going to, so what do you do? Now those people are getting into the realm of becoming executives, but even out of those 5 people, like 2 or 3 of them married co-workers and left within a couple of years. So that's the problem. So it's great that 7-Eleven is already in the position, I guess, to set a target like that, and given that they are a member of Keidanren, of the big business association, that's actually a pretty aggressive and prominent sort of a target. It puts good pressure on other companies, so it's good to see. But this is one of the areas where you can say Japan is, I don't like to say Japan is ahead or behind on things because it's all situational, but Japan really is genuinely behind on this. It hasn't really tried or considered gender balance and representation an issue like for decades after the rest of the world sort of did. It does make sense. I mean, that a company like them, I suppose, service industry, I'm sure of the employees, they make up a pretty high women, and 42. In fact, women make up 42% of customers at 7-Eleven Japan. I mean, everybody uses 7-Eleven, so I'm kind of surprised it's not actually 50. And if you consider who goes to the supermarket, well, again, if you consider 7 Holdings owns many supermarkets and stuff as well, I'm kind of surprised it's actually not more than 50%. But certainly, this is the argument for companies that talk about gender representation, the idea that, if they're completely detached from their customers. But yeah, we'll see. Anyway, it's a good sign of the times. So that is the first story. Into the topics. I see some butter importing stuff. I will try not to get into that. Mr. Cordy Chap, you should keep a log of my starting time. Tower Records, says Sergeant Bilko. I've missed the reference to that, so I'm just going to have to skip over it. I don't know why that got hidden, Migzvim, but Migzvim, you Japanese 7-Eleven, well, yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, out of the Japanese chains. I remember when I was first living in Japan and my mum was worried that I was eating properly, and I said, listen, let me show you rock bottom in Japan. It's a convenience store. It's vegetables, the bentos are awesome. It's you can't really go wrong. So yeah, you should definitely do that. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the censor bot, but it moves in mysterious ways, the Google algorithm. Story number 2. This was interesting. I might spend a little bit of extra time on this one. Speaking of, gender equality issues in Japan, at 80% of Tokyo high schools, for all high schools in Japan, you need to pass an entrance exam to get in. It's not actually part of mandatory education. So, it's all voluntary, and schools all have their own entrance exams. There are, as far as I'm aware, not standardized national exams. Could be wrong about that. But based on this, so schools basically set their intake of how many students they're going to take and the scores that are required to get in. However, I didn't know this until I read the story in the Mainichi that there are apparently most schools set a gender rating, which is basically that 50%. 50% boys, 50% girls. So the entrance exam scores are set differently for boys and girls in order to ensure that there are, every year there are 300 boys and 300 girls. So what happens is because girls on average are doing better academically in 80% of schools, so 20% is the other way around, boys can get into a high school with a lower exam score than girls need to get because the average score for girls is higher, so it's more competitive, so it's harder for them to get in. So I guess what that means is, in a way, you kind of have a situation of affirmative action for boys trying to get into high school because girls on merit, on pure competition and ability, are beating the boys in 80% of schools. And the result is that because they separate the intakes by gender to have some sort of a managed balance, yeah, girls are being penalized for being smarter. It's harder to get into schools because of that. Boys with lower school scores can get in. It reminds me, when I tweeted this, again, it was surprising to me that you'd have a gender thing at all. But some people said, is this like the thing about the lawsuits in America about affirmative action where that don't benefit Asian students, for example, who are suing like universities in America for not being able to get in, even though they have better scores than people who are, getting in. Not exactly. Well, the thing with Asians is, of course, complicated, and those were often backed by a lot of sort of white men's rights sort of activists and so on. Because they were basically Asian men in America categorized the same as white men in terms of affirmative action or not being eligible for it. The thing about affirmative action, of course, is that it is to set up. It's supposed to be temporary, and it's to set up to correct underlying structural sort of social imbalances to sort of see if you can, encourage and correct an underrepresentation that needs to be corrected. So where you have in places like Japan situations where, I don't think this is actually a problem at a high school, but where you have situations where you might have certain minorities or certain, often women being vastly underrepresented. And we've talked about in the past about the Tokyo Medical University, and the situation there that they were actually deliberately trying to manage the numbers to restrict the number of women coming in because they thought they'd all get pregnant and run away and not do doctor duty at the hospital, and all that sort of thing. So, there are sort of prejudicial, so there's a history of prejudicial treatment of directly aimed at discouraging women from applying to roles that they're qualified for. That was actually just a straight up injustice because they were qualified for it. But, you know, I've grown up in New Zealand in army camps and so on myself, where most of my classmates were from, at least partially. In New Zealand, there's a lot of mixing, but, you know, there's a lot of, probably more than half my classmates were part Maori or part Pacific Island. And yeah, I remember having classmates that were as smart or smarter than me and had no concept that, you know, their idea was getting school certificate, getting out of school as soon as they can, and joining their parents', you know, relatives' trucking company or something. I remember talking with these people who got better scores than me, and they had detailed life plans. Like, they had their stuff really sorted out. They were thinking about, you know, getting jobs and so on, when I was thinking about climbing trees. You know, I expected, my parents always sort of, there was an expectation around me that I was going to go to university and high school, which you live up to. And it shows that sort of environment. You can be smart enough to go to college and not even consider it because of your environment, including, you know, economic sort of barriers. And that's why you have affirmative action. This is different. This has an effectively being affirmative action for the people who, you know, overall generally are the ones who get the jobs and the advantages later on. So yes, some people, it's kind of funny. On the one hand, there are a lot of people saying it's outrageous, of course, that we're, you know, that girls who are earning the better scores are not getting their places, and a lot of people, I think, are feeling like, well, that's what affirmative action does to you know, to white men in particular, and actually white women as well. I don't think that it's always gender based, but it's not exactly the same as affirmative action. It's just an interesting outcome where you have schools trying to ensure a gender balance. Not getting into the definition of gender, which is becoming increasingly complicated as well. But yeah, it shows, and this is, by the way, very much the situation in New Zealand, that girls on average get better exam scores. I remember when I was at law school, the year that I graduated, you know, the positions going at top law firms, part of the reason I left the country was, you know, like the top 20 law firm positions for new grads out of the 100 grads, they all went to girls. And I was like in the running for one of the positions, and I didn't get it, and I was, screw this, I'm going to Japan. And thank heavens it worked out great for me. But it was clear when I was in, you know, really academically competitive, you know, parts of university and whatnot, I was, you know, it was all women. And in New Zealand, of course, representation and so on, at least based on gender, is gone very much the other way. Yeah, so it's kind of funny when the tables turn in a way that women are being penalized for being smarter. Yeah, and it's an interesting one. I mean, put in the comments what you think. I mean, on the one hand, it feels wrong to be to have quotas, or just like as an outcome. Certainly, generally speaking, Japanese males are not a discriminated minority in Japan that needs special extra support. So any sort of an outcome that a Japanese male who has all these other advantages in life is getting a leg up in any sort of academic entrance over women, you know, over more capable, you know, women with better exam scores, feels like a wrong outcome. But there again, I get why schools want to have a balanced sort of gender ratio of school entrance as well, and why they separate it. It's kind of a sign of success in a way. But yeah, I'm curious what people think. Anyway, leave your comments in there. Thought it was an interesting problem, and it reminds me a little bit. It's not the same problem as the problem of the universities trying deliberately to block women from entering. It's different to that. But it does show that, you know, girls are being penalized where they are actually excelling based on merit. So yeah, interesting situation. Back into the comments. Let me. Sergeant Bilko, Tower Records are still around in Japan but got closed down in US. Oh, is that right? So a good example then in that case. Although even in Japan, I think they're down to like one shop now as well. Really, then the music shops, so they held on longer here indeed, and they are excellent for buying vinyl and stuff like that, which came back. It's almost like vinyl actually supported them better than DVDs and CDs did. But yeah, they're struggling here as well, but that is an excellent point, Sergeant Bilko. Thank you for that. To YY, good to see you. Boo, good to see you in the chat. Dan H, you work for John Lewis Partnership, employee owned. We are seen as a woke company. Lots of coffee. Have some changes in our board level. We're still mainly forces towards middle class white people business. And Quinn Rankett is opposed to governments interfering in this area. Now, remember, in Japan, this is not governments forcing this, in either direction, actually. This is the schools themselves deciding, and this is why you get all these different outcomes. In Japan, this is like what's happening with the vaccinations, by the way. Partly a legacy of World War II as well. All the power was taken away from the central government, and a lot of things. This is another example. They leave it up to the local school boards to decide textbooks, curriculum, entrance exams, and including things like this, how they intake people. The point of that is, though, that when you have thousands of schools and school districts in Japan, it means that you'll get these anomalies. Occasionally you'll get schools that use radical sort of textbooks and whatnot. However, this is 80% of high schools in Tokyo, so it's an interesting outcome, isn't it? But no, definitely Quinn Rankett. I think I'd expect, I certainly get the idea when it creates issues of justice. I mean, the creation of Singapore was from Singapore not agreeing to pro-Malay affirmative action. I think affirmative action has its place, but plenty of people who think for perfectly thought through reasons that it doesn't have a place. Certainly, the ideal is it not being necessary. But in any case, that's not what this is. This is actually probably an unintended outcome of just a merit base where they just thought they just had a boys register and a girls register. But interesting. Anyway, Mr. Cordy Chet, vinyl is indeed coming back strong. Brianna W., did the article say why girls are getting higher scores on average? You know what, the Mainichi, let's take a look. 20 girls failed despite having a higher score than the lowest male applicant. Let's just make sure I understood this correctly. I thought it was because they were getting higher scores on average. Whether a student passes or fails is based on junior high school assessment, but the passing score is different. The corrective... So I think it's just that they're separating them, and it's just that they're taking they're just using cutoffs based on the top, 100 boys and the top 100 girls, and it's just that the girls have a cutoff at a higher score. I think that's it. Before the correction measures, about 90% had different lowest passing scores for boys and girls. Yeah, so it's just that they're using gender separate cutoffs. But in any case, link is here and it's in my Twitter as well. But the fact it's producing this outcome is what's drawing attention. So it's an interesting example. It's not one I've heard of before. It's definitely not affirmative action. It's not. This is just a statistical. This is just an outcome that's based on having separate entry of treating entrance scores separately, not as a school, but by gender within the school. And it means that in 80% of cases, girls that are trying to get in with higher scores on average are finding it harder to get in than boys. It's proving to be advantageous to the boys to separate the gender. Interesting case. Aaron's company is almost all women. Corporate travel agent business is highly women. I suppose you often get that. But you know what? Even in Japan, I would bet that JTB and companies like that, the travel companies, even though most of the staff, like airlines, for example, where so many of the staff are women, the top are still overwhelmingly men. And these are the sort of companies that should be leading the way, I think, promoting employees into executive positions. But we'll see. To YY, I am correct. Thank you for checking that. Second story. It's 11:05. Always happens this way. It never gets any easier. Okay, next story. Kind of just a small thing. I thought this was just an interesting graph. We've been talking for a while about the collapsing fertility rate in Japan. Everyone was looking at Japan as the country that was the brown line there. Starting in 1980, Japan had the lowest fertility rate in the world, and everyone was sort of looking at it. And since then, Hong Kong has plummeted. Wow, actually below 1.0 for a time. South Korea, which back in 1980 had a fertility rate of 2.5. I mean, they were pumping them out. They are now down to 1 as well. In fact, by this chart, they've actually gone higher than that. But I heard that like 2020, they've gone down to 1. In fact, South Korea is blue. Oh, so they are down to 1. Taiwan also has collapsed from being... Wow, so wait a minute. South Korea is blue, so they were nearly at 3, and Taiwan was at 2.5, and South Korea and Taiwan have both collapsed way below Japan. You've got China there as well. Is actually crazy. One child policy, and they now have a higher birth rate than Japan. And Thailand as well, coming down. So just interesting sign of the times. Like I often talk about, these problems that you hear about the aging society and whatnot in Japan, it started here earlier, but Japan is now, in a way, these problems are happening in other countries now, and not just in Asian countries and Western countries too, in a far more accelerated way. A lot of discussion happening about it. I think I've seen a lot of discussion just in the last few days, videos and stuff like this about this. TLDR is a good YouTube channel that I think talked about this, and they mentioned that apparently two trends are happening in Europe that are being noticed. One, average sperm counts have collapsed, which they think are affecting fertility in the last 20 years. The other thing that's happening is apparently average penis size has also collapsed. Again, how do they check that? Honestly, I've never been told to line up. Sperm count, I guess I can imagine you know people, but even then, I mean, how do you do a statistical sample? I guess if you have people going to fertility clinics, people that already have problems, you could get that data. But yeah, probably best not to think about that too much, I suppose. But I can certainly understand how you've got a certain pool of data for sperm counts and you can measure it getting lower. I don't know how they're measuring that male organ sizes are reducing, but apparently this is something that's happened globally in the last 20 years. And again, I don't know how that would have any impact on fertility, but it came up in a story about fertility. I don't think that's a problem, actually. But yeah. So people are obviously worried, maybe about the wrong things in some cases. But yeah, it's happening all over the world, and some people are saying it's because of all the plastics and the hormone disruptors, and a lot of people say it's from tofu. But again, look at Japan. Well, that's not a good argument. But all the things that people think. I remember watching a pizza review show, and they were saying a tofu pizza. Tofu will give you boobs. It won't. Look at Japan. Everybody eats tofu all the time. So, but the plastic stuff, there are disruptors. That's one of the theories. The other theory, I think, just modern life and people not wanting to have kids. The lower counts. Who knows? It could. To me, it could be easy access to adult material on the internet. It's just meaning that guys are just they're releasing the guys more often. Who knows? They keep the counts low, but the result is globally that the replacement level, most countries are now relying on immigration to replace their populations or to try to maintain a sustainable population to pay enough tax for the elderly. And that's something that Europe and America have done, although increasing problems in Europe around that. And in Japan, they are, not really doing that, and they're accepting the population is going to head for like a 40% decline in the next 20 years. And humankind has never gone through that before. Another thing that TLDR pointed out about this as well, and this is definitely what's been happening in Japan, is there's a bit of a vicious cycle aspect to it. Once the population goes down across generations, and you have generations of people that grew up as single children or whatever, it's actually really hard to encourage people to suddenly have 3 or 4 children again. Like they grow up with that being normal. This is what's apparently happening in China. Now China is actually trying to encourage people to have more kids, and they don't want to. Countries like Hungary have been successful at encouraging people to have more children and paying incentives to have babies and whatever. Japan is doing the same thing. They pay for all the costs and whatever of having children, and you get a stipend and everything. But even then, the problem isn't cash. People are worried about losing their lifestyle, their freedom, their ability to do what they like from having kids. And once people realize that, it's kind of hard to take that back. A cash bribe isn't really enough. So, it could be all the things, right? It could be plastics. It could be the tofu. It could be the adult entertainment accessible. It could be the smaller penises. Who knows? Who knows what's causing it all? It could be all the things. But yeah, the result is you have a really intractable problem. I'm kind of the school that honestly, I don't know that perpetual. I mean, while I wouldn't advocate for population reduction, I think it's actually great to have more people, and I'm excited that we're about to live in O'Neill cylinders and live on Mars. And I think that we can actually technologically, we don't have to go back into a dark age to avoid killing the planet. I think we actually can technologically. I'm optimistic that we can solve environmental issues like global warming with technology and with, moving off the planet and stuff like that. I don't think we have to go backwards, and I'm not anti-population. But at the same time, since it's here and it's happening, I think it's one of those things which, can be managed and can have an upside. Having a bit more living space, being able to retool areas, I think it's an opportunity which people should also take. So anyway, we'll see. But I drew quite a lot out of that graph, didn't I? I should keep an eye on time. Into the comments. Yeah, TYY is saying that it's proven. I mean, I think I've read stuff about that as well, although, you know, who really... Yes, I've seen that what do they call them, endocrine disruptors or something like that. I'm familiar with what you're talking about, but again, it is still not absolutely certain. Like, is that coming in? Is that from me drinking water in a pet bottle? Is that doing it? You know, like what's causing the things? You know, is it from the general water supply? Even if you can say that that is something that can happen from plastics, like, then how is it directly, through what route are we ingesting it, and how is it affecting, if that is the case? So it's hard. Yeah, TLDR News, Mr. Cordy Chap, it's a good YouTube channel, among many that I watch that are like that, just for news and stuff like that. Aaron, CEO is a guy. There we go. Just checking comments. If not, boom, I'm going to jump back into it. 19 minutes to go. Plenty of time. That's only the third topic. Still speaking about Quinn Rankin, before I jump in, population reduction will play havoc with government retirement pyramid schemes. Well, that's exactly what Japan is facing. And yes, that's why the retirement system here, which is taxpayer funded, or at least is mandatory savings, but it's a fake scheme. They've already spent all the money on it, on public works, from people's mandatory superannuation savings, and it's going to collapse, and everyone knows that. So that's absolutely correct. Quinn Rankin. Yeah, just going the opposite way in Japan, kind of, again, behind. I don't like to say advanced or behind, but Japan, one of the last countries in the world, along with North Korea, to approve the contraceptive pill, took until the late 1990s before it was approved. And the debate around it, the political debate around it, was opposed by gynecologists, and it was opposed by politicians. The gynecologists. And it's funny, you don't hear so much about it nowadays, but the story was back then that, you know, they used to make so much money from abortions. I mean, it was pretty common and routine. It's something I haven't heard about really since I've got here. But in the 90s, I'd hear, like, yeah, it was really common for girls to not use any contraception and to have multiple abortions before they decide to get married and settle down. And it was sort of done routinely, and it was big business for the doctors, and the doctors would oppose birth control. Kind of crazy that reproductive doctors would oppose birth control, but they did. It was a racket for them, and for the politicians in the LDP, they opposed approving birth control because they saw how it had driven feminism in America and other countries, and they thought it would disrupt Japanese culture, and they blocked it for years and years. And it wasn't until after they rushed through, Pfizer, the Viagra. It wasn't until they rushed through Viagra after 20 years of blocking contraceptive pills. That finally they had to give in. In fact, I think it was actually during the time that the opposition parties were in power that they gave in and they passed it. So here's another kind of case different to that, but this is the Plan B pill, so a little bit more controversial, that people can take after, the event. Right now, you have to go get this from a prescription from a doctor, and again, some people who are intimidated to go and explain the situation, why they need a Plan B pill to a doctor, and the Doctors Association themselves, they look like, the Ministry of Health looks like it is going to approve making this across the counter in pharmacies, making it available in pharmacies, that you won't have to go and get a doctor's slip to go get it. Again, gynecologists are opposing it because it's kind of a loss of control in business for them. There's a cynical way of looking at it. I suppose there are health consequences, but again, it definitely raises the barrier to asking for it for people who need it. And it's one of these things that's been blocked for a long time, including the debate. If the country is losing population, why would we make it harder to have why would we be facilitating contraception? It comes up from elderly people saying it, including, I think I talked about the pep talk from the mayor the other week about who was saying, everybody start hooking up and, doing all that stuff with each other. Please go ahead. Like the mayor, I mean, that's the creepiest welcome talk I think a mayor has ever given. But, again, this isn't the way that you increase the population by withholding. I mean, and unfortunately, the thing is, they end up at the guy one way or another. Japan doesn't have the same stigma against abortion, that at least not religious. So they're going to end up there one way or the other. This is, I think, a preferable thing. So yeah, it's interesting. It's again coming late to Japan, and it is controversial, but the Ministry of Health is deciding to do it, and it's a small sign of progress again on gender issues. Next topic, still on gender things. There was a debate over the last couple of weeks. I always talk about, this is a little bit I talk about how one thing I like about Japanese politics is that it doesn't politicize very much. When you're in New Zealand or Australia or America and you have an election, the party manifestos that the parties put out, the presidential debates, when they work, they may never work again, but when they do work, you have 3 debates, hour-long debates or 2-hour-long debates or whatever, talking about foreign policy, the economy, jobs. You have all of these sort of categories and all these detailed policies on each one of what you're going to do. In Japan, it's kind of like smiles are good. They'll do a slogan. They never used manifestos. The Democrats used a manifesto, which was revolutionary, and they got elected when they did it, and then they tore it up and ignored it, and they got kicked out for it. And then everyone said, okay, we're not going to do the manifesto thing anymore because it's too dangerous when we break all the promises. But yeah, in a way, not having detailed manifestos means that things like immigration, controversial social sort of issues just don't get politicized. It gets left to the tenured bureaucrats, which can be a bad thing because they're not accountable, and they can, in cases like vaccines and whatnot, they can slow things down and stop innovation. But there again, sometimes you just don't want the politicians who are like the least qualified people in some matters, like the thing happening in the UK at the moment with the inquiry into the COVID-19 thing. People admitting themselves that they should not be making important scientific decisions. Interesting case here, LGBT. There was a committee which is proposing to put into law prohibiting discrimination against LGBT people, basically an equal rights bill, proposed law for ensuring equal rights, including marriage equality, and as well as prohibiting discrimination against LGBT people based on their gender identity. And it got stuck in a Liberal Democratic Party committee with a number of people, mostly all over 80 or 90. They got a woman, the only woman on the committee, to sort of speak up and talk for them. And they said that they can't approve this law because the idea that it could be made illegal simply for saying discriminatory words, for simply discriminating against LGBT people. What are we supposed to do? Was literally what she said. It's like, what are we going to do if we can't discriminate against LGBT people? How is that supposed to work? As well as a bunch of other comments which people unfortunately made publicly, including like, well, they're not normal, So in a way, this is the problem. When you offer the opportunity for them to do the right thing, it also gives them the opportunity to do the exact opposite thing. And while social stigma in other countries can still censor behavior, when you've got 80, 90-year-olds, their peer group are not people who think any differently to them. So the result is, unfortunately, the bill got killed because explicitly the government felt like, they didn't want to criminalize people simply for discriminating against LGBT people, like what, which is like the whole point. Japan, it's one step forward and 100 meters sprint backwards sometimes, and this is one of those cases. The thing is, of course, on this, the story in Japan is generally positive. Right now, municipalities, the local government level, like I talked about in the beginning, half the wards in Tokyo, all these cities in Japan recognize LGBT marriages. They'll register de facto sort of couples as with an equivalent of a marriage certificate, which entitles them, increasingly entitled to things like insurance and other benefits. And this is basically to take out the ambiguity. So what happens if you live in Shibuya and you're married to your same-sex partner, and then you move somewhere else that doesn't recognize it, and you can't claim the same benefits? If they're giving you a benefit in Shibuya, spousal benefit, that you can't get if you move to Hachioji. I don't know if that's the case in Hachioji. To take out the administrative inconsistency, given that there's a growing consensus that this should just be treated the same. But yeah, killed by the national government because they opened it up for a debate, which is a shame, but that's what happens. So yes. Into the comments, AV84K, the way modern societies work, laws work, etc., might also not be helpful in terms of having and supporting children. Poor countries are the ones with many children. Yeah, I find that really interesting, AV84K. Absolutely correct. It is funny, and you look at that graph before. The high birth rates are definitely associated with when those companies were still very much developing, and as they became wealthier and more successful, you'd think you work hard in order to, be able to provide for a family and to comfortably have a family. And yet when you get into that position, then you don't want to do that anymore. Seems to be the lesson. It is, again, the old story about, I remember my history teacher describing the baby boom when I was in high school. Everybody got back from World War II. There was nothing else to do. There was a baby boom. I suppose that's part of rural and poor areas as well, lack of other entertainment, I suppose. But it's certainly the correlation between all over the world, particularly where you have rich and poor areas side by side. The fact that you get these, how do you pronounce the Portuguese name? João Palma? Anyway, great to have you subscribed. The fact that you have always higher birth rates and population growth in less well-off areas is fascinating. It's counterintuitive, but Barry Bonds, good to see you. Who else is in here? Did I miss any other comments? Population, already talked about that one. So yes, next topic, boom. Japan targets 1,000 hydrogen stations by the end of the decade. I talked about hydrogen all the time. I won't linger on this one, but it doesn't seem like very much either when you think the end of the decade is 9 years away. And I think there are hundreds of thousands, well, tens of thousands of petrol stations. And the whole idea is that you can extract hydrogen from petroleum, from coal. You can actually, for all of the fossil fuel industry, rather than shut them all down and fire all those workers, you can capture and sequester the carbon from it, and you can extract hydrogen, which burns clean. I mean, it emits water, and you can put it both into fuel cells, and you can use it as a combustion engine fuel as well, and you can still make combustion engine cars, as Toyota showed last week. So, as a way to convert in a way that protects, that it also is a remedy for climate change. Hydrogen stations are a good idea. Of course, there's this big thing at the moment. America's gone all EV because, frankly, America can't rely on infrastructure to change. So batteries work for that, but batteries are, messy. They have a limited life. Hydrogen, you can just pop straight in like fuel, and over and over again, and it's clean. So even though it's not as efficient energy-wise as having an EV battery, I still really like hydrogen, and it works better for a lot of things. I mean, you can fuel rockets, planes, ships and whatever, things that won't work well on a battery that has to charge for a long time. It really works. So again, Japan is going all in on setting up a hydrogen infrastructure. Not enough, but it is a technology that I think is really exciting. And long term, I'm thinking decades from now, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the primary source of fuel light for everything, particularly if we can find ways to, if we can improve the ways that we can extract it. So I don't know, I'm all in on this, actually. I think it's a good thing. I think it's great to have multiple solutions, including EV cars and whatever, but and improving batteries, it's great how that technology is going, but this is an important thing. I'm excited about it. Hey, believe in yourself. I have no context for that, but you're uncensored anyway, so go ahead. Getting into the coronavirus stuff, we've got 5 minutes left. Plenty of time to talk about corona. Oh, before I talk about the one at the top, let me talk about the one at the bottom. This is easy to misunderstand at the moment. Japan, land of crime. Police officers, you recall a few years ago, visiting New York Metropolitan Police Commissioner visited Japan on a tour, talked with the Tokyo head of police, and asked, how did police in Tokyo spend most of their time? What tasks do they spend most of their time on? And yes, apparently the head of the Tokyo Police Agency responded that most of the time they spend filling out lost umbrella forms. When they actually analyzed the amount of time that people in the Tokyo police force spend doing different things, filling out forms for lost umbrellas is the number one thing that if you thought you were in for a life of fighting crime, no, you're in for a life of filling out forms for lost umbrellas. So they love the paperwork. It's a big thing. But I suppose at some point, things just get a little bit boring for that, and people feel like doing something else. The situation that we're talking about, AV84K, the post-World War II baby boom situation, they had nothing better to do. Well, apparently, maybe they didn't feel like filling out any more damned umbrella forms, and so apparently one lady, the situation here is that there was one lady, this was in Hyogo, I believe, Kobe, she thought, apparently, all the people involved were married to third parties, but apparently a particular woman who was sitting in the koban with another police officer decided that they would make fun time, and they did that for a while, and then afterwards she decided to hook up with another person in the same koban, and apparently somehow this information got out. Probably somebody who went in to report a lost umbrella was startled and reported to the police, and apparently there was an internal affairs investigation And they found out that, yes, indeed, this particular female officer made a habit of on the job fun time in the back of the call button, in the back of the police box. And 2 resigned and 1 was fired. So, yes, no more umbrella forms for you. I'll come back to the coronavirus stuff. There are still more stories. The Great Umbrella Caper is still going strong. That's right, you better believe it. Quid Rankid asks, where do they get the hydrogen? At the moment, they're doing a big deal with Australian companies too. At the moment, it's mostly grey hydrogen, frankly, grey or blue, which is that they are getting it from existing fossil fuel sources and sequestering the carbon. So it's kind of got a win-win that it's enabling infrastructure that's already there, and they're putting it, they can have the fossil fuel companies that had natural gas ships or whatever, they can just fill it up with hydrogen instead. So that's what the Japanese government's mainly investing in. Green hydrogen is the ideal. That's where you have a renewable, solar or wind power station, creating H2O by electrolysis from water by a river or by the ocean. That's the ideal, but it's still really expensive to do, and Japan is investing in that as well. But the majority of hydrogen that it's setting up is still hydrogen that's extracted from coal or oil or gasoline. So to me, that's actually a pretty. It's kind of you win with everybody with that, right? You're using hydrogen and you're sequestering carbon, so you're addressing the climate change thing at the same time as you're actually supporting existing energy infrastructure. That's what Japan's mainly focused on right now. To YY, there seems to be a theme here tonight. Yeah, I guess there is a theme. What can we do? Maybe it's the supermoon. Maybe it's the supermoon. I'm pretty sure that was it. I wouldn't know those. We couldn't see it. It was cloudy. Biggest letdown of the decade. But there we go. Barry convicts in poor countries, children are an extra pair of hands and a monetary benefit for labor. Yeah. But you know what? Not always. I'm just thinking. There are countries where really impoverished countries. Well, yeah, I suppose you're right. Where they work. Who knows? Yeah, I guess, it's complicated, obviously, but yes, that's clearly part of it. Simlock, if you've got a phone in Japan, right, as you'll know, like from the get-go in Japan, you couldn't just swap a SIM card and change phone companies or move across and re-register your SIM card with a different phone company. The phones themselves had chips in them that locked, which basically meant if you wanted to change phone companies, you had to buy a new phone and change your phone number. The Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, it's a good move. After much signaling and preparation, in principle, new phones that are sold after October this year you'll be able to go change phone companies without having to change your SIM card or your phone. SIM locking will be removed. That is good news. Another thing, I've talked about government IT and what a disaster it is in Japan, for all the same reasons I've been saying throughout the show. It's all decentralized, and they're often, everybody has different systems at every municipal level. They're based on manuals which are created when they are originally designed by these large Japanese IT companies that basically try to lock them in forever on maintenance and updates on these specialized custom systems. The government has said all systems have to integrate and be basically unified with the central government system within 5 years. And everyone's saying that's impossible. But this is where they're talking about using cloud. They're trying to improve IT infrastructure in Japanese government. It's no joke. It's no exaggeration to say that there's still an over-reliance on even places which have computerized systems, because they're not compatible with the systems of other prefectures or the central government to transfer data from a prefecture to the central government. They literally have to print out and fax the information that then has to be manually inputted into the central government systems a lot of the time. And this is how they do the coronavirus counting and whatever. They don't just put it often for many systems, they don't just enter in a database and it updates in the central government system, which is what the government wants. It actually is only saved in the local city council system, and they actually have to print it out, and they actually have to pay people to type it in, and they make mistakes, and all sorts of stuff happens. So IT in government is a disaster in Japan, and the digital agency is kicking off in September, whose first task is going to be to address this, and they've set themselves a 5-year target to fix it. But all the local governments are screaming and saying that's improbable, that's impossible, probably because it is. But I'm glad that they're setting the target, and honestly, screw them. They've been getting away with that for far too long. Remote work, this is getting a bit more towards coronavirus stuff. Outside of Tokyo, it's been relatively picked up in jobs in Tokyo, I guess because Tokyo has a lot of white collar jobs. But outside of Tokyo, even companies that can do remote work, even that during the previous state of emergencies have been using remote work, they've not been doing it. Surveys have been finding that people, managers in particular, and workers find that they miss the communication that you get from working in person with other employees. A lot of people also citing that internet connections, like being at home with a bad internet connection, can impair your ability to do work, as well as just the fact that so many jobs you just can't do remotely and they involve face-to-face. But even a lot of work that you would think could be done remotely, again, because it's pretty common for so many Japanese companies to put such a high priority on supervision and training and mentoring and constant communication. There's actually now a bit of a backlash against remote working, particularly outside of Tokyo, where it hasn't taken off. And yeah, it's interesting to see. One Johnson, love the weekly news vids. Any plans for other types of content? Can't get enough. Hey, well, this is why I've been having Erin help me to do the short videos, just to make the content more accessible. But hey, I love this stuff. This is pretty much as much. I've got a busy day job, so this is as much as I can commit to doing. But I'm glad that you're enjoying it, One Johnson. I hope you subscribe, and definitely remember to like, of course, because it helps. Actually, really appreciate that. Other stuff that's happening. I didn't know this. The Hungry Little Caterpillar, of course, the greatest literary work of all time. I mean, I remember this book when I was a kid, and it's memorable because it's awesome how you open up each page and it's got the hole in the worm and the increasing pieces of fruit and stuff. It's an awesome design. Apparently, when the book was first created in the 1960s, was it 1968? In America, they couldn't print it. The only companies in the world that could print it were Japanese companies. Again, it's like when you hear about the Transformers and the toys. Even when Japan was a third world country in terms of technology, in terms of like living standard and development standard, it was still the only country in the world that actually had the capability, much like I suppose you have with China nowadays with many forms of manufacturing. You had to go to Japan to get it printed. So all those original Hungry Little Caterpillar books, by the way, the book is hugely popular in Japan as well, but the original books that you were reading in Europe and Australia and New Zealand and America, the original books anyway, until it took them a long time to develop the capability to produce these books in America, they were all made in Japan. I love that. I didn't know that. I thought that was just super cool. Apparently the anniversary coming up, but we're causing some discussion. But there we go. It was hatched in Japan. That is just awesome. Japan made a joint statement with the EU, hoping for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. I.e., we really hope that Taiwan and China get along, and China just doesn't, specifically, I guess it's an indirect way of saying we really hope China doesn't invade and destroy Taiwan. But basically, hoping for peace was the statement from in the Taiwan Strait. So not saying Taiwan, not saying China, just hoping that stretch of water is a peaceful place. That's all that they said. China lost their shit. Do you not interfere in the internal affairs of China? I mean, again, China's really been in the old wolf warrior, which is a phrase that they invented as a strategy that they recommended, which is just like a byword for being dicks to everybody. I guess, in a way they're behaving much like European powers behave all the way until pretty much World War II, and like America's behaved ever since. They're kind of switching into that mode a little bit. But here's a dandelion, screw your dandelion. Yes, kind of harsh, China. I mentioned the cannabis law becoming harsher. Good to see that there are advocacy groups with reasonable, normal people like this lovely, normal-looking, person saying, "Hey, isn't that a bit stupid and harsh?" Raising it, so it's good to see there's a public debate about it happening a little bit. That isn't the government kind of going a little bit nutso on the bashing cannabis thing, which I agree with. I don't expect them to get much traction for the reasons I explained in the previous video. That it's a generational problem. This you talk about that graph with the birth rate down there. The other consequences is that you have few young people and you have a bunch of increasingly easily outraged elderly, Facebook uncles and callback, telephone, call-in radio callers basically running the country who are just exceedingly outraged at everything, including things that they did that young people don't do nowadays. I mean, just nuts. But yes, good to see that the debate is happening. Another thing that happens from population decline that's a problem in Japan, of course, all these abandoned houses and what to do with them, because, Japan doesn't have rights to take over houses that are abandoned for a long time. So it means that you have in a lot of rural towns that have cleaned out, in particular, ghost towns of unkept houses, basically just sort of, and now some of these have been around abandoned since the bubble, since the early 1990s. So some of these houses are starting to collapse. And, you know, basically they're destroying the image of the towns as well. Hey, Chad Carby, thank you for subscribing. So yeah, a number of local governments have actually said for houses that are now in such a state of disrepair as they're no longer habitable, the local governments are now passing laws to basically take them over and make them available for anyone to live in and take over for free. You know, better to have someone come in and do the work to clean them up and rebuild on the land than to just leave them there falling apart, literally. This is something I've been talking. This should be the dividend of depopulation. Should be the ability for people to be able to get housing more cheaply, and young people to be able to move out to towns and take advantage of all the new available land. And it's not been, because of Japan's land ownership laws, it's not been able to happen. So it's good to see. This is a good, I think, baby step in the right direction of solving that problem. Lo Wang, just distract me by giving me a compliment. That's the best thing you can possibly do. In fact, yeah, you should definitely give me lots of compliments. The red value, hey, good to see you. Update on your cloud app, it's done. Oh, good on you. Okay, well, put the info in the chat there and actually message it to me directly. I'll tweet it and I'll check it out myself. But good to hear that red value and good to see you. Boom. Yeah, definitely praise me. Do what one John-san did. I mean, that's the way to my heart. Yes, if there's a zombie in the house, stay clear. Good advice. Yeah, vaccinations proving to be a hotter commodity in Osaka than Tokyo. Yeah, it turns out that we're in Osaka, like all the reservations that were available in the mass vaccination centers run by the self-defense forces were like out in like 25 minutes. In Tokyo, they're hardly full at all. And if you ask me, in Tokyo, people complain about that the distance to the mass vaccination center is so far that they'll just do it locally with the local government. There's enough set up so elderly people don't feel the need to get on a train and commute an hour to go to a mass vaccination center in the center of Tokyo. That said, what I see a lot of local governments starting to do is, to the extent they have open slots available in reservations, a lot of people are now pivoting, first of all, to allowing like emergency workers and school teachers and so on to be able to take those free slots to get a sort of advanced run. In some prefectures, actually, the government is now moving. I've got a thing in here as well, where the central government is actually looking now to authorize, so long as local governments are going to meet their target of vaccinating all of their over 65s by the end of July, they will allow extra capacity available now to be given to anybody at the discretion of local governments, including young people or whatnot. So I'm really hoping at some point this will mean that, yeah, if I can go out during the day, I can just be on standby for when there are open reservation slots at either local or in Otomachi, and I can go get my shots, my Pfizer shots. So yeah, again, it's kind of good to see that. Then this should also help accelerate the rollout, because this is a situation right now. They're using time-based slots, and if they're not full, it's kind of a waste at the moment. The government is trying to rush to get as many people vaccinated as possible. So yeah, good that they're being flexible. Also really good that municipalities are recognizing things like school teachers, police, fire, first responders, and so on, as other groups of people not currently covered in elderly or endangered groups for that. Johnson & Johnson vaccine is up for approval, so that's a good thing. Yoyogi Park, two big things about this, that they've created a public viewing area for the Olympics, where the idea is that even if you can't attend events, you can go and watch it on a big screen in a park. So, some space, a bit of room for social distancing. However, the plan is to allow 35,000 people into Yoyogi Park to watch the big screen, which is funny because right now the rule for Yoyogi Park is no parties of more than 5 people. So, 5 people or 35,000 people seem to be the rules right now. In order to enable the viewing space, they also said that they were going to substantially trim or prune trees around the viewing area. It turned out this was going to be pruning, like cutting off branches of 35 trees out of the 20,000 in the park. I honestly don't have a problem. I know I saw some people, including Rochelle Kopp, who started a petition against the pruning of the trees. The pruning of the trees happens anyway. I mean, yes, doing it for a pro-Olympic sort of event to enable 35,000 people to come into the park to watch it together and possibly become a huge coronavirus cluster, I have a problem with that. But the idea of pruning 35 trees in a park as big as Yogi Park, and they're only cutting off branches, they're not chopping down the trees. Yeah, I couldn't get that worked up about that part of it. I get worked up, not very much actually, but a little bit more about the idea that they are still planning to do events of 35,000 people anywhere. I mean, that would make sense. If you have people in the stadium and you want it as an overflow area, great idea. But the fact that they're still preparing for that when Tokyo is in a state of emergency is still a little bit crazy. And much like that, there's the Tokyo prefectural government is looking to set up its own mass vaccination site using that large parking space at what used to be the Tsukiji fish market. However, apparently they just realized that, yes, they'll be able to do a bunch of first shots there, but by the time 2 weeks later it'll come to give everybody their second shots, the Olympics will be started by the time they can get this going. And during the Olympics, that parking lot is going to be the parking depot for all of the taxis and buses used to transport athletes around for the Olympics from the village to the Olympic sites. So it won't be available. So again, this is just another case where the Olympic preparation is interfering directly with plans to vaccinate the population. So yeah, the Tokyo government's trying to figure out they can do max vaccinations, but only of first shots, and so they have to make sure that those people will have access to second shots somewhere else, which is a challenge. Those are all the topics. It's 11:41. I've been going consistently 10 minutes over lately. So yeah. Do I think that Japan will be open to vaccinated travelers in August? Well, anything can happen, but right now, I doubt it. I'm hoping. I saw there was a news story this week, Red Value, that All Nippon Airways is starting a scheme to check a sort of a digital version of a vaccine pass. So, yeah, the companies are experimenting with it, and who knows, there might be some momentum with it. Remember that the Olympics goes from like late July to I think early August, so I think it won't be till well after the Olympics is behind us that will be a possibility. I'm hoping it'll be around the end of the year or early next year. I think August is probably a little soon, but you never know. It could happen. It could happen. People are looking at the technology now. Those are all the topics. Thank you, everybody, for watching and all the comments and engagement. Great to see everybody, as always. Remember, if you please like the video. I do appreciate it. Also, if you're not subscribed, subscribe. Do that good thing. I hope you appreciate just going through what's going on in Japan and get a bit of a feel for the place. I've got nowhere else to go and nothing better to do. I'll be back here at 10:30 Japan Standard Time next week. I might even do a musical jam before the show like I did this week if I have a bit of time in hand. It's always a nice thing to do. Great to see all of you. Lysander 45, good to see you as well. You'll be fully vaccinated before you arrive at the end of August. Good on you. I think by the normal run of things, I wouldn't get a shot till like October, but I am optimistic that as local governments open up free capacity to like lottery or people who can jump in and get it, because I'm working remotely, I'm hoping I can maybe get it locally somewhere here, like when an elderly person doesn't show up. So I'm hoping I'll get my shot, but we'll see how it goes. Milchman too, good to see you. Tuned in late, but glad you appreciated the show. Great, as always, to spend the hour with you. Have a good day wherever you are, especially those of you just starting the day. Have a good evening if you're in Japan. Have a good afternoon if you're in Europe. And yeah, see you all next week. Have a good week. Remember, as always, you can follow me on Twitter. Keep cool till after school. Kakite no peace. Boom. See you later. Any stream. Oh, end over here. Wrong button.